Good evening. Can we have the volume up just a tiny bit here, just so that I don't have to project my voice as much? Maybe a tiny, tiny, tiny bit more. So funny. There we go. Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this little encounter that the Buddha describes about before he was awakened, when he was just an ordinary person like us, and he encountered some people quarreling, just in case you see anything in the news about quarreling or something. So the scene is that it's between the Sakyan people and the Kosalian people. And they had these irrigation channels that were from the river that formed the boundary between their two regions. And one year there was very little rain. So they were quarreling about, okay, what are we going to do? That we want all the water. No, we want the water. What are we going to do? This is maybe not so unfamiliar. Something like this, and apparently they were insulting each other, and it got so bad that the different armies were on the two different sides of the river about ready to go to war. And the person who was to become the Buddha, he's not the Buddha yet, shows up, and he wants to talk to them. And then he describes the impact that it had on them. I'm just going to share with you a little excerpt here. It's not the complete it's in verse. I should say this is a short little passage that's in verse. And it goes like this. Just look at people and their quarrels. I will speak of my dismay and the way that I was shaken seeing people thrashing about like fish in little water. Seeing them in conflict with each other, I became afraid. I felt discontent at seeing only conflict to the very end. Then I saw an arrow here, hard to see, embedded in the heart. Pierced by this arrow, people dash about in all directions. But when the arrow is pulled out, they don't run and they don't sink. So what is this about? This whole idea. I've shared this verse a few times when teaching. I just love this. It's very there's a richness here. There's lots of themes that I could pull out, but I'm going to pull out this one particular theme here. I'm just going to read these few lines again, where the person who's about to become the Buddha, he's not the Buddha yet, he says, I felt discontent at seeing only conflict to the very end. So this idea of like, wow, I don't see how this is going to end. Seems like there's just always going to be, like there's no way forward. I just can't imagine how it's going to be. And then it continues, then I saw an arrow here, hard to see, embedded in the heart. So he's looking at them, seeing nothing but quarreling, and then looks back at himself and sees that he has this arrow in his heart. Pierced by this arrow, people dash about in all directions. So, whereas before he was thinking like, okay, you guys got to get it together and figure it out, and whatever this problem is, here, maybe I can help you, like, really kind of this emphasis on what's happening there. But then when he saw this arrow, recognizing that people, when they have this arrow, dash about in all directions, that is, maybe, I like the word maybe thrash about in all directions. Throwing blame, throwing judgment, you're throwing insults, or, all kinds of things that happen with this arrow in the heart. And so, what is this arrow in the heart? We might say it's the myriad ways in which we say no. No. No to this moment, no to this experience I'm having, no to anything and everything in this kind of way. This way that there's small and countless ways in which we are cultivating this discontent, in which we are resisting what's already here in our experience. I'm not talking about conceptual big things that are happening out there or experiences that aren't immediate. I'm only talking about this moment, in which we're saying no. This is a little theme I've been talking about lately. I've just been, this maybe just the climate these days, and also noticing in myself the way that I'm often saying no to things like, no, I don't want it to be this way. And then just seeing the impact that it has on me, these subtle ways. So resistance, this way of saying no, I don't want it. Make it go away. It should be different. This shows up in so many different ways. I'll talk about it this evening, but it's just this natural response to discomfort. I mean, right, this is just a normal thing that our predecessors, our ancestors, of course, they had this discomfort, maybe was, in response to a threat. And so they had to pay attention or had to behave in a particular way. But it's this way that this response to discomfort it's conditioned. It's something that we learned, like if we didn't respond, then we had a lot of discomfort, a lot of pain, and we didn't, that's painful, so we try to, create a way in which we can avoid it. Or maybe we just saw, our communities, our families, the way that, okay, there's certain discomforts that are tolerable, exercising, restricting what we eat, or something like this, but there's other ones that aren't tolerable, emotional discomfort, and we're not ever going to talk about this uncomfortable thing, for example, or something. So it's conditioned, we learn it, it's a natural thing, it's all of us have them. I certainly have them. I'm guessing that you guys have them too. So it's this, when we encounter something unpleasant, whether it's a difficult emotion, uncomfortable emotion, or maybe it's a challenging situation, which then gives an uncomfortable emotion, I might say, or maybe if it's just a minor inconvenience, which then gives rise to an uncomfortable emotion of irritation or impatience or discontent or something like that. So it's this natural human tendency to push it away or to avoid it or try to control it, might it be different. And it takes many forms. So what are some of these ways that I'm talking about here? There's this way in which this resistance, this way of subtly, or maybe not so subtle, sometimes saying no, shows up. We might call this mental resistance, things that are happening in the mind. There's this where we're creating stories or narratives to help us not feel the discomfort itself or to avoid feeling whatever the emotion is. So we can create these complicated stories or narratives. I'll give an example in a moment. Or we might try to rationalize or minimize or intellectualize the situation. And this is one of my favorites. I didn't recognize it so much, but it's not a mistake, right, that I spent years of my life training to be a scientist and then being a scientist. Right? Scientists are ones that like to just go up into their head and rationalize things, intellectualize it, and I did my fair share of that. I come from a family of scientists, so, it's not a mistake that I do that. It's not a mistake that I became a scientist myself. Or there might be this way in which we get caught in these loops of judgment and blame, and we're just kind of stuck going around and around and around and not feeling like there's any way forward. But there's this way, just being in this loop also helps us, not actually feel the emotion, feel the difficulty. Instead, we're just in this loop again and again, just with this stuckness. I'll give an example of this. Or we might distract ourselves with busyness or planning. A lot of planning or just being busy. Yeah, I like to do this too. Oh, I need to prepare for this and get ready for that and design this, and I don't know, it seems like I can always cook up things to do to be busy with. So what are some of these examples? What if you imagine like you experience a significant loss, but you tell yourself and you tell others, oh no, I'm fine. I'm fine. And actually I'm moving on really quickly. And there's this way in which it's not quite true. And instead it's this denial of what you're actually experiencing. And it's a way that it's preventing you from fully grieving from this loss. You're telling yourself and everybody, oh no, I'm fine, I'm fine. And then with not fully grieving and processing this pain of this loss, whatever the loss might be, right? Our lives are filled with so many loss of loved ones, relationships, jobs, capacities, capabilities. This is the human experience. So there's one way in which we might be resisting feeling that by saying to ourselves and to others, I'm fine, I got this, it's going well. Or maybe you have a disagreement with a friend, and instead of acknowledging the hurt feelings, you spend hours just replaying the conversation in your mind and focusing like, oh, I should have said this. Shoot, why didn't I say this? Or maybe you're rehearsing in your mind all the reasons why your friend was wrong and they shouldn't have said that, or they shouldn't have said this, but there's this way in which kind of like going over and over what happened and what you should have said or what they should have or should not have said just keeps you stuck in the story, just going around and around. Another form of resistance, you're not feeling the pain from this disagreement with a friend. This like schism that got created, and not feeling the hurt. Instead, you're just stuck in the story, and in some kind of way you're perpetuating a certain type of hurt, maybe. Or maybe you're perpetuating this idea of like, well, the next time I see them, I'm going to, X, Y, and Z. And kind of like nurturing this sense of resentment and what I'm going to do next or something like this. But there's this way that this also prevents you from feeling and processing your underlying emotions. Keeps you stuck in the story. Or maybe you just find yourself caught in a loop of just intrusive thoughts about a past mistake. Like, oh, I can't believe I did that. Regret, remorse. Or maybe you're this future worry, oh, I hope this doesn't happen. And saying this over and over again. And you try to suppress the thoughts, but they just keep on returning with a greater and greater intensity. And there's this way in which we're trying to control the thoughts, which is actually just another form of resistance. So we're using resistance to deal with the resistance, which of course is just resistance. And so there's this way that kind of like strengthens these thoughts, right? They just get perpetuated because there isn't a way in which we can allow them to maybe shift and change and bloom into something else. So those are different ways in which the mind can have some resistance against feeling uncomfortable emotions, whatever that emotion might be. Sadness, anger, blame, regret. But there's also a way in which we just might suppress or deny or numb our feelings, or maybe we're like projecting our emotions onto others, or maybe we lash out in ways that we have an inappropriate response to something. And I was thinking about this, that I spent some time trying with this. Like every time that I was projecting, like, oh, wow, that person is angry or that person is sad, I just made it a practice, like, am I angry? Am I sad? Why am I projecting this onto them? And it's quite something to do this, to discover, oh yeah, there was a little bit of anger there. This is more in my personal life I'm talking about. When I'm in the role of a Dharma teacher, I meet people in a different way than I'm just meeting them with like my friends and family and just in my daily life. And that's something for me to think about too. Like, why is it? Why is it a little bit different when I'm in the role of the teacher and when I'm just with my friends and family? But just this idea that sometimes we are just so concerned, or we're like, wow, they're so angry. Well, they should really work with their anger. And not recognize that, in fact, we are the angry one, but we don't want to feel our anger, so we're just projecting it all onto somebody else. I mean, this shows up maybe, or having this like inappropriate responses also could be maybe as we lash out at our partner over just a minor issue. And our anger is disproportionate to the situation, and maybe there's this way that this is masking a hurt or a resentment that we don't want to feel. This is another way that resistance shows up, is just making a lashing out or something like this. Or maybe we feel overwhelmed by a loss, and so we find ourselves watching way too many YouTube videos or doom scrolling, or so there's so many things that we can do, right, to numb the pain. Another form of resistance. And then lastly, I'll talk about, there's physical resistance, where we might try to escape through using substances, addictive behaviors, or unhealthy relationships. There's all these ways in which we are trying to just not feel the heartbreak that we might have, not feel the discomfort of minor emotions or even the big major ones. And this can show up also just in carrying chronic tension in our shoulders, our neck, or our jaw, which is this expression of this unexpressed anxiety or stress or something. So why do we have this resistance? I said that it's because we don't want to feel discomfort, but there's this way that our brains are wired to protect us from perceived threats. And this works when there are actual threats. Doesn't work so well when the threats are just discomfort of emotions or something like this. So we resist, we have this fear of discomfort, but we also have this desire for control. We want to control things, of course we do. We want to feel like things will be the way that we want them to be. We want to feel like that we have the agency to make our life go in the direction that we want. And we have this idea, I can just figure it out and I can fix it, and then everything's going to be fine. Or I'll figure out a way to make this go away or something. This sense of wanting to control, to feel like that we can just make everything be okay, instead of feeling, oh, it's not okay. It's not okay. So we are busy trying to fix whatever we can, whether it's a major thing or a small thing. Fix ourselves, fix other people, fix objects, writing nasty letters to whomever. Like, it really shouldn't be this way. It should be however it should be, Or maybe there's a way in which we resist because we have attachment to our stories. We have this stories that we tell about ourselves or about them, those people over there. And we are resisting what's actually happening because what's actually happening doesn't go with the stories that we have. For example, maybe you've been hurt by someone in the past, and you replay this event over in your mind, or you have. And there's this way that this has been built up into your mind, and you're reliving the pain and the anger and all the associated emotions. And then part of this is you're telling the story of how you were wronged. This may be true, you may be wrong, have been wronged, but then there's this way in which you're holding on to the resentment as a way to protect yourself from being hurt again. And it's this resentment that prevents you from forgiving or prevents you from letting go, and instead you're stuck and you're not moving forward. Instead, the resentment is a form of resistance, of feeling actually the betrayal, feeling the hurt, feeling the pain of whatever, or the anger of whatever happened. Or maybe this idea of control, you have a family member or a loved one, somebody you care about, and they have the unhealthy habits, and you're always giving them advice, you really should do this, and you shouldn't do that, and I don't know why you keep on doing this, and you try to persuade them to change, and then you feel frustrated when they don't comply. Whether this is kids or partners or parents. This is kind of your desire to control their behavior is just your resistance to feeling the discomfort of actually you have anxiety about their well-being. It's going to feel terrible if their health really declines or there's some accident due to the things that they're doing. And so we're resisting accepting that we can't force someone to change. And instead we're just going to stay in there. So we're doing this because we think it's going to make us feel better, but this resistance actually amplifies and prolongs the discomfort. We don't know this, of course, because we're so busy resisting. We don't know what it's like to be when we're not resisting. But it ultimately, it definitely creates more discomfort. There's this way that, what we resist persists. It turns out to be true. There's this way in which when we're tangled up with something, it's the whole activity of being tangled that keeps the difficulty present, instead of allowing it to arise and to be experienced and to pass away, which is the nature of all experiences. But not only does it kind of maybe amplify or prolong our discomfort, but it really limits our growth. By getting stuck in resistance means we're not learning like how to be with discomfort in other ways, and it kind of maybe it's we're missing some insights about some of the way that we are showing up in the world and why people are responding to us the way they do, perhaps, or something like this. Or maybe there's this way of resistance also creates some disconnection. When we're having to resist, we're no longer present with what's actually happening, the anger, the sadness, the grief, the rage, whatever it might be. So how can we work with this? How can we work with resistance? How can we not resist the resistance? Just notice it. Start by just noticing. Notice all the ways in which the mind and the body are how they react when you anticipate you're going to experience discomfort or you are experiencing discomfort. Do you tense up? Do you start thinking negative thoughts? Oh, this is going to be terrible. I can't handle this. This is, I don't, there's so many different thoughts here. I'm not so good at extemporaneously coming up with them. Or do you reach for distractions? This is what I do a lot. I reach for distractions. And sometimes I don't even realize it's such a habit. I'm like, oh yeah, I've already distracted myself. And right, we've created a society that's filled with nothing but distractions, right? We all carry around these little gizmos in our pockets that are designed to be able to distract ourselves. So one is just notice some of the ways in which we are resisting anything that's uncomfortable. And chances are we'll have a whole myriad of ways, but there might be some that are more common than others for us. And then once we've noticed it, can we just acknowledge their presence? Say, oh, I'm feeling resistance right now. Resistance feels like this. And then it might be right into distraction again. Or it might be into the body being tense again. Just simply acknowledging it might not be enough to disrupt this momentum, but this is where it starts. This is where it starts. Just acknowledge it. No need to judge yourself or push it away like, yep, this is resistance. This is a natural thing. Humans don't like to feel discomfort, and we do different things to prevent us from feeling discomfort. But these things that we're doing are kind of causing us to be stuck. And it's the opposite of having freedom. It's the opposite of having peace. And then acknowledge the resistance as best you can. And then shift from storyline to sensations. That is, shift your attention to the sensations in the body. What's actually here. Tangible, moving much slower than the thoughts, and something that is easier to rest your attention on than thoughts, or something kind of like diffuse about this concept of a resistance. Feeling tension in the shoulders is much more tangible and palpable. And then can you acknowledge the discomfort of the resistance, the tension in the shoulders? And can you acknowledge the discomfort of whatever it is you're resisting? You don't have to necessarily jump right into the grief, jump right into the rage. Just be with the resistance to the grief and the rage as best you can. As best you can. This makes a huge difference. So often, like we don't even know that with the grief and rage, I'm just using these two as examples, we don't even know that we have resistance to them. But if we can be with the resistance, then the grief may show up, the rage may show up, it may not. But it'll show up in a different way. It'll unfold in a more natural manner instead of being amplified and prolonged by resistance. So it will arise and pass away. I can't tell you exactly this time frame, but I promise it will arise and pass away. The more resistance we have, maybe the higher it is and the longer the duration. So notice the signs of resistance. Just get curious about yourself. What are the ways in which what do you do when you don't want to feel anything uncomfortable? 2, when you notice that, oh yeah, that's happening right now, just acknowledge it. Maybe it can be helpful just to say, okay, I'm feeling resistance right now. 3, to bring attention to the bodily experience. This is so much easier to be with and so much more real, actually. It's what's actually happening in the moment. You might be having an uncomfortable emotion, you might be having a resistance, and you're having bodily sensations. So you're being here with the experience. And then 4, be kind and patient with yourself. This is not something that gets untied really quickly, but this is the way to peace and freedom. It might seem like, oh, this is just some minor little thing we're supposed to do, but it turns out freedom is all about not having to resist anything, not having to avoid things, or not having to pretend like things are different than they are. Freedom is to be able to just meet whatever is arising. So if we want freedom in our lives, if we want peace in our lives, if we want to not have this arrow in our heart that the Buddha to be was talking about, then we look at our resistance patterns. And then we have peace with whatever's arising. And then we can show up in a world bringing this peace. And we can see things differently, feel things differently than others can. Then we can be a force that helps create peace in the world, instead of insisting that those people over there should behave better. Instead, we are the ones that have the peace. Like, why not start here? So, resistance is a natural part of the human experience, but it doesn't have to be something that we can learn how to use it to be a way that supports greater peace and ease and freedom in our lives. And by learning to recognize and work with resistance, there's this way in which it just will happen. There'll just be more ease in our lives. And here's a poem I'd like to close with. This is by Dorothy Hunt. And it's called Peace is This Moment Without Judgment. Peace is This Moment Without Judgment by Dorothy Hunt. Do you think peace requires an end to war, or tigers eating only vegetables? Does peace require an absence from your boss, your spouse, or yourself? Do you think peace will come some other place than here? Some other time than now? In some other heart than yours? Peace is this moment without judgment. That is all. This moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. Peace is this moment without thinking that it should be some other way, that you should feel some other thing, that your life should unfold according to your plans. Peace is this moment without judgment. This moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. So resistance as the path, working with resistance as the pathway to peace. Thank you. And I'll open it up for some comments and questions. Thank you.
Sometimes to be a healthy adult, don't we have to listen to our resistance? I remember when I was 19, I had this 21-year-old girlfriend who was really manipulative. And I wish I would have listened to my resistance sooner and said, okay, I think we should not see each other anymore. I stayed with her too long, probably. So don't we sometimes have to listen to our resistance from the heart?
I guess I wouldn't, I'm using resistance as a different way than you're using. You're talking like maybe where the body and the heart is saying, no, this isn't helpful for me. That's different. Resistance would be completely denying your experience, for example. But you were hearing the no and choosing not to follow it, or for some reason. So I'm using resistance a little bit different. I'm using resistance as this present moment experience, to not want to be with that experience. Does this make sense? Or
Yeah, I'm just wondering if sometimes if to be a healthy adult, we have to listen to our no. We have to be able to say no. Just is an important part of being healthy. Saying no, right?
yes. But I think what you're pointing to, of course, right? We have to have boundaries, and we have to say no. Yes, of course we do. Maybe I'll just leave it with there. Yes, we have to have boundaries and be able to say no. Yes.
Thanks for the talk. It really resonated, and I think just want to share maybe a couple of comments or observations that I thought were interesting. I think one, using the analogy or the metaphor of like the arrow, it was interesting that recognizing the arrow, by doing that, you're basically pulling it out. Like in recognizing it, you're pulling it out. I was originally thinking of it as like, oh, there's going to be steps, but so I thought that was interesting. And then the other thing that came to me during the talk was I was reminded of there's the 5 hindrances, and one of them being doubt. And as I was thinking, it's easy enough to talk about the arrow, right? And in one point of time, like one arrow at a time. But then I sort of started to have doubts when I was like, well, here's to a lifetime of arrows, or many at the same time, and how do you know when you've pulled them all out, and those types of questions. But I think having faith in the process is part of removing them. You're not going to find a discrete point in time where they're all out, but I don't know, that was an interesting one. This kind of tests the faith.
Yeah, thank you. This idea of like, oh my gosh, how many arrows are there going to be? Non-stop arrows for the rest of my life. That's just an idea, right? And you use this word doubt, right? That's just an idea. It turns out that once we start to get sensitive to this, resistance just shows up so much less and less. Yeah. So thank you for highlighting this. And when you talked about the 5 hindrances, I thought you were going to talk about aversion, because aversion is maybe in there too. But yeah, thank you. Anybody else have a comment or question? Okay. So I'm wishing you, well, now with the time change, am I the only one that's like feeling like, oh, something's not quite right? Yeah. So I'm wishing you, I don't know what to say, a happy, healthy time change. I don't know. I'm wishing you a wonderful evening. Thank you.